The morning mist still lingered over the lake when she showed up on my property, heels clicking against the wooden dock as if she owned the place. This woman, another HOA, Karen looked me dead in the eye and told me I had to sell my cabin for a fraction of its worth, or she'd make my life miserable. What she didn't know was that not only do I own this cabin, I own the entire lake she's trying to control. Let us know where you're watching from today, and if you're new here, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to join our growing community. The sun had barely risen over the lake when I stepped out onto my cabin's front porch, coffee mug in hand. The surface of the water was like glass, reflecting the fiery streaks of dawn as if the world itself had stopped to admire the view. This cabin wasn't just a place to relax, it was my sanctuary, built on land my father left me. Every nail, every plank carried a story, a memory. I had barely taken a sip of coffee when I heard the crunch of tires on gravel. A white luxury SUV pulled up, the kind of car that screamed, "Look at me." The door swung open, and out stepped a woman in her late 40s, dressed like she was headed to a country club instead of a lakeside property. Her blonde hair was perfectly coiffed, oversized sunglasses covering half her face. Even from the porch, I could feel the storm brewing in her stride. She didn't bother with pleasantries. "You own this cabin," she demanded, her voice sharp and commanding. I set my coffee down on the porch railing. "Yes, ma'am, I do." "And you are," she scoffed. "I'm the president of the Lakeview HOA. We've decided that this cabin," she gestured wildly at my home, as if it were an eyesore, "doesn't fit the aesthetic of the community. We're prepared to offer you a generous sum to take it off your hands. $50,000. Take it or leave it." I almost choked on my coffee. $50,000. The land alone was worth 10 times that, not to mention the cabin's history and the fact that the lake itself was mine. I looked her square in the eye, fighting the urge to laugh. "You're offering me 50 grand for my family's cabin. That's cute. Why don't you turn around, get in your fancy car, and drive back to wherever you came from?" Her face turned crimson. "Excuse me, you don't get it. If you don't sell, we'll make your life miserable. We have rules, sir. We'll fine you, block your access to the road, cut off your water. You can't win against us." The arrogance dripping from her words was almost entertaining. She had no idea who I was or what she was up against. "Ma'am," I said calmly, "do you even know who owns this lake?" She waved me off, clearly not listening. "This entire area falls under the HOA's jurisdiction. We've been planning to upgrade the shoreline. And, frankly, your old shack is standing in the way of progress. Be reasonable. Take the money. You'll thank me later." That's when I decided to have a little fun. I stepped down from the porch, walking toward her, slow and deliberate. The gravel crunched under my boots as I stopped just a few feet away from her SUV. "Let me tell you something," I said in a low voice, firm and unshaken. "This cabin isn't for sale. Not for 50,000. Not for 50 million. And if you think you or your HOA can bully me, you're in for a rude awakening." For a split second, I saw her falter. Maybe it was the way I looked at her, or maybe she finally realized I wasn't just another pushover she could steamroll. "You'll regret this," she spat. "We'll see how long you last when the HOA decides you're a problem." I gave her a slow smile. "We'll see who regrets what." With that, she climbed back into her SUV, slamming the door so hard it rattled the windows. The tires kicked up gravel as she sped away, leaving a cloud of dust hanging in the morning air. I stood there for a moment, watching her retreat. She thought she held all the cards, but the truth was, she didn't even know the game she was playing. I owned this land, the lake, and more than she could ever imagine. As I walked back to my porch, I picked up my coffee mug and took another slow sip. The lake shimmered in the morning sun, peaceful and silent, a sharp contrast to the storm that had just rolled through. That was the moment I knew this was just the beginning. Karen wasn't going to back down. And, honestly, neither was I. She wanted a fight. Fine. I'd give her one, but on my terms. After Karen's SUV disappeared down the gravel road, I sat back on the porch, staring out at the glassy surface of the lake. It's funny how people like her think they can bully someone into giving up what's theirs. They see an old cabin and assume the owner is some desperate soul holding on to scraps. They never see the history, the blood, and the sweat that built the place. My father built this cabin with his own hands back in the early 1960s. He wasn't a wealthy man, just a hard-working carpenter with a stubborn streak and a love for the water. I was a kid when he'd load me into his old Ford pickup every weekend to drive out here. I'd watch him saw, hammer, and measure every beam, teaching me how to build something that could last generations. "This place is going to outlive us both," he used to say, wiping sweat off his brow with a rag. "A home is only as strong as the hands that build it." When I turned 18, Dad handed me my own hammer and told me to finish the back porch by myself. It wasn't perfect crooked nails, uneven boards, but he didn't care. He said it was mine, and that made it special. Over the years, I've restored and upgraded the cabin, but I never touched that back porch. It's a reminder of who I was and who he raised me to be. Karen probably thought this was some vacation property I could just give up for a quick payday. What she didn't know is that this cabin isn't just real estate. It's family history. It's where we celebrated birthdays, where Dad taught me to fish, and where I brought my son for his first canoe trip. Every corner of this place holds a story. And the lake. That's a whole different tale. After my father passed, I inherited not just the cabin, but the surrounding land, including the entire lake. It was part of an old purchase agreement my father made decades ago when this area was nothing more than wild land and dirt roads. The HOA that Karen runs didn't even exist back then. They only started sprouting up in the last 15 years, trying to regulate every nail and paint color in sight. But here's the thing, their rules don't apply to me. This land, this lake, it's all mine. I've paid every tax, every fee, legally. They can't even set foot on my dock without permission. The fact that Karen thought she could waltz up here and tell me what to do was laughable. I took another sip of my coffee, feeling the heat of the sun starting to warm my face. Karen's words were still ringing in my ears, her threats, her smug tone. She had no idea that she wasn't just barking up the wrong tree. She was barking at the man who planted the whole forest. I walked down the steps toward the dock, running my fingers along the weathered wood. This dock had seen better days. Sure, but it was solid, like the rest of the place. I thought about my dad teaching me to tie fishing knots here, about the summer nights when we'd sit and watch fireflies dance across the water. No HOA could ever put a price on that. I remembered the first time I brought my son here, after I bought out the neighboring lots. He was just 8 years old, wide-eyed and full of questions. "Dad, do you really own all this?" he asked, his voice almost a whisper as he pointed at the wide, open water. "Every inch of it, buddy," I told him, ruffling his hair. "And one day, it'll be yours." That's why Karen's little offer of $50,000 wasn't just insulting, it was laughable. The taxes I pay on this land each year are more than her generous offer, and that's not even counting the businesses I've built or the investments that make me a far cry from the small-town man she assumed I was. But I wasn't about to show my hand just yet. People like Karen thrive on power plays, and I had every intention of letting her dig her own hole first. The breeze picked up across the lake, carrying the scent of pine and fresh water. It reminded me that some things can't be bought, no matter how many rules or threats people throw at you. This cabin and this lake were mine, and no HOA president was going to change that. I sat back down on the porch, pulling out my phone. If Karen wanted to play games, fine. I had my own moves to make, and trust me, they'd hurt a lot more than a rejected offer. A few days passed without a peep from Karen, and I almost thought she'd gotten the message. Almost. By the third morning, just as the mist was lifting off the lake, I heard the familiar crunch of tires on my gravel driveway. This time, she didn't come alone. 2 SUVs rolled up, both white, both polished so bright they looked out of place on my dusty road. Out stepped Karen, of course, dressed like she was headed for a board meeting instead of an argument. With her came 3 other people, 2 men and a woman, each carrying clipboards and wearing smug expressions like they were about to write me up for something. I leaned on the porch railing, sipping my coffee, not even bothering to stand. "Morning," I called out. I take it you brought reinforcements. Karen flashed me a smile so fake it could have been made of plastic. Mr. Mason, she said sweetly, these are members of the Lakeview HOA board. We're here to discuss your property and ensure it meets community standards. I raised an eyebrow. Community standards. Last I checked, this land isn't part of your community. One of the men, a tall guy with a receding hairline, stepped forward like he was about to lecture me. Sir, all properties bordering the lake fall under our purview. We have regulations about dock maintenance, shoreline appearance, and overall aesthetics. It's clear your cabin hasn't been approved by the HOA, and will need you to address several violations. I couldn't help but chuckle. Violations? You folks have no authority here. This lake isn't under HOA control. Karen smirked, pulling out a stack of papers from a leather folder. Oh, but it is. We've expanded our jurisdiction, and these documents outline the new regulations. Failure to comply will result in fines and possible legal action. I walked down the porch steps slowly, coffee still in hand, and took one of the papers she held out. It was filled with legal jargon, vague bylaws, and threats of fines ranging from $500 to $5,000 for various infractions, none of which applied to me. You know what's funny, I said, handing the paper back. This is all meaningless. I own the lake, every drop of it, and your HOA can't enforce a single thing on my property. So you can take these papers and... I stopped, giving them a smile that made them all shift uncomfortably. Well, let's just say they're worthless. Karen's face tightened, but she didn't back down. We'll see about that, she snapped. We have resources. We've handled people like you before. I took a slow sip of coffee. I highly doubt you've handled anyone like me. The other woman on the board, younger and clearly new to this HOA power trip, looked nervous. She whispered something to Karen, who ignored her and continued to stare me down. You have 1 week to comply, Karen said firmly. If you don't, we'll escalate this to our attorneys. Consider this your official warning. With that, she turned on her heel, signaling her little entourage to follow. They piled back into their shiny SUVs, and within seconds, they were gone, leaving a cloud of dust and the faint smell of desperation behind. I stood there for a moment, staring at the empty driveway. Karen wasn't just arrogant. She was dangerous in the way people with a little bit of power can be when they think they're untouchable. Fine, I thought. If she wanted to play games, I'd play too, but on my terms. That evening, I sat down at my kitchen table with my laptop and started digging. A few quick searches revealed a lot about the Lakeview HOA. They had a reputation for overstepping boundaries, slapping fines on homeowners for things as petty as leaving a garden hose uncoiled or planting unapproved flowers. There were even lawsuits from former residents who claimed the HOA abused its authority and bullied people into selling their homes for cheap. Interesting. The more I read, the more I realized Karen wasn't just bluffing. She'd built her entire identity on being the queen bee of this community. But she was also reckless. And people like that always left loose ends. I made a few calls to my attorney, a man who'd handled bigger sharks than Karen. You're telling me they tried to fine you on land you own? Outright, he asked, incredulous. Not just fine me, I said. They tried to buy me out for pennies on the dollar. Then they threatened me with legal action. My attorney chuckled. This is going to be fun. Let's start by confirming what we already know. Their jurisdiction ends at the property line, and I'll send a formal letter reminding them of that. The plan was simple. I'd let Karen push as far as she wanted, then I'd pull the rug out from under her. People like her never saw it coming when someone stood their ground. The day after my call with my attorney, I woke up with a renewed sense of focus. Karen might think she had the upper hand, but I'd been in bigger battles than this. Owning multiple companies and navigating high-stakes negotiations taught me one thing: never let your opponent know the full strength of your position until the moment you strike. I spent the morning walking the perimeter of my property, taking photos of the dock, the shoreline, and the cabin. Not because I needed evidence, I knew I was in the right, but because I wanted a record of how things stood. People like Karen love to twist the truth, and I wasn't about to give her an inch. By midday, I had gathered enough documentation to fill a folder: property deeds, survey maps, and tax records, all proving I was the sole owner of the land, the lake, and everything within its boundaries. My father's original purchase agreement from decades ago was the crown jewel, signed, notarized, and ironclad. As I scanned the old papers, I could almost hear my dad's voice. Never let anyone take from you what you built with your own hands. He'd grown up in a time when a man's land was his legacy, his fortress. I wasn't about to let a self-appointed HOA president tarnish that legacy. That afternoon, my attorney sent over a draft of a formal letter. It was polite but firm, outlining that the Lakeview HOA had no legal claim over my property or the lake. It also included a warning any attempt to trespass or interfere with my land would be met with immediate legal action. I read it twice, smiled, and told him to send it. But I wasn't stopping there. Karen had gone out of her way to embarrass me, trying to act like I was some clueless recluse who didn't understand community standards. If she wanted a power game, I'd give her one she'd never forget. That evening, I started making calls to a few friends, in-town people who knew me not as the quiet guy by the lake, but as someone who'd built a fortune from scratch. One call led to another, and soon enough, I had a stack of information on the HOA, financial records, board meeting minutes, even a few quiet complaints from residents who were tired of Karen's bullying tactics. It turns out Karen had been running the HOA like her personal fiefdom. She'd spent community funds on frivolous beautification projects that lined her pockets, all while threatening homeowners with fines if they dared to push back. More than one family had sold their home just to get out from under her thumb. I decided it was time for a little reminder of reality. The next morning, I drove into town and met with the county surveyor's office. They confirmed exactly what I already knew: the HOA had zero authority over my property or the lake. In fact, part of their shoreline maintenance plan illegally extended onto my land. That meant Karen wasn't just bluffing, she was overstepping the law. Armed with that information, I called my attorney again. Let's add one more line to that letter. I told him, make it clear that if they step foot on my property again, we'll be filing a trespassing complaint. He laughed. I like your style, Mason. These people won't know what hit them. 2 days later, I saw Karen again. She showed up at the edge of my driveway with 2 board members, her sunglasses perched on her nose like a shield. This time, I didn't wait on the porch. I walked right down to meet them, folder in hand. Morning, I said casually, flipping the folder open. I believe you got a letter from my attorney. Karen's jaw tightened. We received something, but you need to understand, this community has rules. Oh, I understand, I said, cutting her off. I understand that you've been throwing your weight around with the neighbors, pretending your HOA controls everything around this lake. But here's the thing, it doesn't. You have no jurisdiction here. None. In fact, the only person who controls this lake is me. Her face went pale. The board members shifted nervously, clearly unsure how to respond. And, just to be crystal clear, I continued, holding up a copy of my property deed. If you or any member of your HOA so much as set foot on my dock again, I'll file trespassing charges. Are we clear? Karen tried to recover, her voice rising. You can't talk to me like that. I'm the HOA president. I took a step closer, lowering my voice. Lady, I don't care if you're the Queen of England. You don't own this land. You don't own this water. And you're not going to bully me out of what's mine. There was a long silence. Karen's lips trembled like she wanted to say more, but the board members were already retreating toward their SUVs. Finally, with a huff, she turned and followed them. As I watched them drive off, I felt a wave of satisfaction. The game had just shifted. Karen had come at me thinking I was weak, but now she knew I was willing to fight and that I wasn't alone. The following weekend, I woke to the unmistakable sound of voices near the shoreline. It was still early, barely 7 in the morning, and the lake was quiet except for a few ducks gliding across the glassy water. But these voices weren't calm or friendly. They were barking orders. I stepped onto the porch, squinting toward the dock. Sure enough, Karen was back. This time she'd brought 2 men in bright yellow vests, the kind contractors wear. They were unloading tools from a pickup truck, setting them down like they were preparing to start some kind of inspection. I didn't even bother to put on shoes, mug of coffee in hand. I walked down the gravel path toward the dock. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" I called out, my voice cutting across the quiet morning. Karen turned, plastering on that fake smile of hers. "Good morning, Mr. Mason. We're conducting a routine shoreline inspection as part of the HOA's maintenance plan. We'll need to measure your dock and check for compliance with our standards." I stopped a few feet from her, the sun glinting off the water behind me. "Your standards don't apply here. I told you last time this is my property, and you have no legal authority to be here." One of the men in the yellow vest cleared his throat. "Ma'am," he said cautiously, "are you sure this dock is under your HOA's jurisdiction? The boundary lines aren't exactly clear." "Don't question me," Karen snapped at him, her voice shrill. "Just do your job." I stepped closer, holding out my hand. "Pack up your tools and get off my dock. Right now." Karen's smile vanished. "You can't stop us. This lake is for everyone in the community. You don't get to claim it like some king sitting on his throne." I chuckled, shaking my head. "You really don't get it. Do you? I am the king of this lake. Karen, I own every inch of it, every drop of water, every inch of shoreline. You're standing on my property. And unless you want me to call the sheriff, I suggest you take your so-called inspection and leave." The men in the yellow vests exchanged uneasy glances. "Ma'am," one of them said again, "maybe we should go. We're not looking to get into legal trouble." Karen shot me a glare that could have curdled milk. "This isn't over, Mason," she hissed. "We'll see how long you last when the HOA brings in lawyers." I smirked. "Bring them. Mine will eat yours alive." She stomped off, muttering under her breath, while the contractors quickly packed their gear and followed her to the truck. I stood there on the dock, watching as they drove away, the rumble of the engine fading into the morning air. Back at the cabin, I pulled out my phone and called my attorney. She tried to run an inspection on my dock today. I told him, "Was she on your property?" He asked. "Right on my dock." I said, "I told her to leave." She refused until I threatened to call the sheriff. He let out a low whistle. "All right. We'll file an official notice of trespassing with the county. That'll get her attention. If she sets foot there again, we'll have the sheriff handle it." "Perfect," I said. "She needs to learn that this lake isn't her playground." The next few days were quiet, but I could feel the tension building. I'd drive into town for supplies and notice HOA board members whispering at the coffee shop. A few neighbors, folks who'd lived near the lake for years, approached me quietly. "Good for you, Mason," one older man said as he adjusted his fishing cap. "Karen's been throwing her weight around for too long. Somebody needed to stand up to her." "Just doing what's right," I replied. "This lake has always been for people who respect it, not for bullies trying to squeeze every dollar they can from folks." Word traveled fast, and soon I started getting calls from other residents who wanted to share their horror stories about Karen. She'd fined one family for having a kid's swing set in their backyard because it wasn't aesthetically pleasing. Another couple had been forced to repaint their home twice in a year because Karen didn't like the color. I listened carefully, taking notes. Every story was another nail in the coffin for Karen's false sense of authority. Then came the day I decided to make it official. I called for a community meeting, open to anyone who lived around the lake. I didn't invite Karen or the HOA board. Instead, I invited the people she'd bullied. We gathered on my dock one evening as the sun set, the orange glow reflecting off the water. "Folks," I began, "I've had enough of this HOA nonsense. They think they own the lake. They don't. And it's time we remind them." There were murmurs of agreement, nods all around. I could see the frustration in their faces. These were good people who just wanted to enjoy their homes without being harassed. From this day forward, I continued. This lake is off limits to the HOA. They don't get to run inspections. They don't get to dictate who uses the water. And they sure as hell don't get to bully anyone into selling their property. The crowd erupted in applause. And for the first time in weeks, I felt like we were turning the tide. Karen must have heard about the meeting because the very next morning, she came storming back, this time with a fire in her eyes that I hadn't seen before. She marched straight up my driveway, her heels clicking on the gravel, and waved a stack of papers like they were weapons. "You think you can turn the community against me?" "Mason," she snapped before I could even open my mouth. "I've worked too hard to let some stubborn old man ruin everything." I let her rant for a moment, leaning casually against my truck. "Karen," I said finally, "you keep talking like you're the queen of this lake. But the truth is, you don't even own a piece of it. I do. And if you think your HOA scare tactics work on me, you're dead wrong." She glared at me, her face red. "You're just a man with an old cabin. You have no idea who you're messing with." That's when I decided to end this charade once and for all. I straightened up, meeting her glare with one of my own. "Karen," I said slowly, "you have no idea who you're messing with." I walked over to my porch, grabbed the folder I'd left on the table, and returned to her. I opened it to show her the property deeds and legal documents, proof of my ownership of the lake and surrounding land. "You see this," I said, pointing to the notarized stamp. "This land isn't just mine. The lake, it's private property, which means your HOA can't touch it. No inspections, no rules, no fines. You've been trespassing on my land every time you've set foot on that dock." Karen snatched the papers from my hand, scanning them with growing disbelief. This can't be right," she stammered. "Oh, it's right," I said, crossing my arms. "And you know what else? I'm not some broke cabin owner, living paycheck to paycheck. I built my fortune with my own hands, same as my father built this cabin. I own businesses across the state. Karen, I'm the majority investor in 3 companies that make more in a week than your entire HOA budget for a year. And do you know what all of that means?" Her mouth opened, but no words came out. "It means I could buy your entire neighborhood tomorrow," I said calmly. "I could buy your house, your board members' houses, and still have money left over to build a second lake next door just to spite you. And yet, I'm standing here asking you to leave me alone." The silence that followed was heavy. The board members who had followed her this time, 2 of them standing awkwardly behind her, looked at each other with wide eyes. It was clear none of them had expected this. Karen's face drained of color. You're bluffing," I smiled. "Am I?" I reached into the folder and pulled out a single-page document, a list of properties around the lake I'd quietly acquired over the years. "I already own half the homes on this shoreline. Ask your neighbors. They'll tell you who they send their rent checks to." One of the board members muttered something under his breath, and I caught the hint of fear in his tone. Karen looked like she'd been punched in the gut. For once, she was speechless. "I didn't come out here to pick a fight with anyone," I continued. "All I wanted was to enjoy the peace and quiet of my cabin. But if you keep pushing me, I won't hesitate to push back. Hard. So here's my offer to you. Karen, you leave me and my land alone, and I'll forget about the trespassing and harassment." Her eyes darted between me, the papers in her hand, and the lake behind me. For a moment, I saw her pride fighting with her fear. But even Karen knew when she'd been beaten. She shoved the papers back into my chest. "This isn't over," she muttered, but her voice lacked the conviction it once had. Then she turned on her heel, her expensive shoes slipping slightly on the gravel as she made her way back to her SUV. I watched as she and the board members drove away, a cloud of dust trailing behind them. For the first time since this whole mess started, I felt like I'd finally regained control of my home and my lake. That evening, I sat on the dock with a glass of bourbon, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The lake shimmered in the fading light, calm and unbothered, like it had been for decades. I thought about all the years my father spent here, all the lessons he taught me about standing your ground. "Never let anyone tell you what your worth is. Son," he used to say. "Only you can decide that." Karen thought I was just some stubborn old man with a cabin. She had no idea I was a man who'd built his life brick by brick, who didn't need approval or validation from anyone, least of all an HOA. But this fight wasn't quite over. I could still feel the storm brewing. Karen wasn't the type to walk away quietly, and I wasn't the type to forgive someone who crossed me. I knew Karen wasn't going to walk away without a final swing. People like her thrive on control on being feared. The next few days were unusually quiet, which only confirmed my suspicion that she was plotting her next move. But this time, I wasn't waiting for her to strike. I was going to end this once and for all. Early one morning, I called my attorney again. "Let's file that legal notice," I said. "I want it crystal clear the HOA is banned from setting foot on my lake or dock. If they try, they'll be trespassing on private property." By noon, the paperwork was filed with the county clerk's office, and certified copies were sent directly to the Lakeview HOA. I wanted Karen to open that envelope and feel her stomach drop when she realized just how powerless she really was. But I didn't stop there. I contacted a local survey team and had them place new, highly visible markers around the property boundaries. Large signs reading "private property," "no HOA access" went up along the road and near the shoreline. It was legal, loud, and impossible to ignore. 2 days later, I heard the rumble of engines again. I walked outside and saw Karen's SUV creeping up my driveway with 2 board members following close behind. They stopped when they saw the fresh signs. Karen got out, her face red as a fire hydrant. "Really? Mason," she barked, pointing at one of the signs. "This is how you want to play it." I crossed my arms and leaned casually against my truck. That's exactly how I want to play it. Those signs aren't for show. They're backed by legal filings. Step 1 foot past that line, and the sheriff will be here faster than you can say HOA fine. She glared at me but didn't move forward. The board members looked at each other, clearly unsure what to do. "You're going to regret this," Karen hissed. "We'll take this to court." "Go ahead," I said, smiling. "You'll lose. I've got deeds, survey records, and a legal team that could buy and sell your HOA 10 times over. The only one who's going to regret anything is you, when your neighbors find out how badly you've overstepped." And that's when I decided to play my ace. I pulled out a manila envelope I'd been holding under my arm. "By the way," I said, "do you know how many complaints I've heard about your little HOA dictatorship? People are tired of your bullying. Karen, they're tired of you using their money for your own pet projects. I've got enough statements and records here to have you removed as president before the week is out." Her jaw dropped. "You wouldn't dare." "Oh, I'd dare," I said calmly. "In fact, I'd enjoy it." I could see the panic starting to creep into her eyes. This wasn't the script she was used to. She wasn't dealing with a neighbor she could fine into submission. She was dealing with someone who had the means and the will to fight back harder than she ever imagined. Over the next few days, I made good on my word. I met with a handful of HOA members people who had quietly reached out to me and shared the evidence I'd gathered about Karen's misuse of funds and intimidation tactics. It didn't take long for a rebellion to form within her own ranks. By the end of the week, word spread that the HOA board was calling for an emergency vote to remove Karen as president. The irony wasn't lost on me. She'd spent weeks trying to control me, and now she was losing control of her own little empire. The night before the vote, I sat on my dock, listening to the gentle lapping of water against the posts. The lake was calm, but my mind was alive with thoughts. This fight had started as a nuisance, but it had turned into something bigger, a reminder that standing your ground isn't just about property or money. It's about principle. I remembered something my father used to say when I was a boy. A man's worth isn't measured by what he owns, but by what he refuses to give away. Karen wanted me to sell this place for pennies, to bow down to her self-imposed rules. But this cabin, this lake, and my family's legacy were worth far more than any price tag. The next morning, Karen didn't show up for the vote. She sent an email instead, resigning for personal reasons. I heard from neighbors later that she was furious, ranting about ungrateful people and outsiders who don't belong. Well, I belonged here more than she ever would. The morning after Karen's resignation, the lake felt different, lighter somehow, as if the water itself had been freed from her toxic grip. I sat on my dock with a cup of coffee, watching the mist roll over the surface. For the first time in weeks, I could actually enjoy the quiet without expecting another round of threats or fake violations shoved in my face. Word of her downfall spread like wildfire. Neighbors who had once been too scared to speak up now came by to shake my hand. "You don't know how long we've been waiting for someone to stand up to her." An older man named Rick told me. He'd lived here for over 20 years and had the look of someone who'd been through a long war with the HOA. Karen's been running this place like a kingdom. It's about time someone reminded her she's not queen of the lake. Glad I could help, I said with a smile. This lake should belong to everyone who respects it, not to someone who treats it like their personal trophy. Over the next few days, I quietly kept my promise to the residents. With Karen out of the picture, I worked with the remaining board members to reset some of the community rules. No more absurd fines for harmless things. No more intimidation over what color your front door was or whether your kids had toys in the yard. The people appreciated it, and while I had no interest in joining the HOA, I'd never let anyone tell me what to do on my own land. I did agree to help them clean up the mess Karen had left behind. Her misuse of funds, her unauthorized projects, even the way she bullied families into selling their homes, all of it was over. One evening, I found myself sitting by a fire pit with a few of the neighbors. We roasted marshmallows while the sky turned a deep shade of purple. A young couple, new to the area, asked me how I managed to keep my cool when Karen tried to strong-arm me. "It's simple," I said, poking at the fire with a stick. "You can't let people like that see fear. The second you give them an inch, they take a mile." My father always told me, stand your ground, even if it means standing alone. And that's exactly what I did. Rick chuckled. "You didn't just stand your ground, Mason. You won the whole war." I smiled, but I didn't say anything. Truth was, this wasn't about winning for me. It was about protecting what mattered: this cabin, the lake, and my father's legacy. Karen, on the other hand, wasn't seen much after her resignation. I heard she sold her house and moved out of state, muttering about ungrateful neighbors until the day she left. I didn't celebrate her leaving, but I did feel a sense of closure. Some battles don't need parades, they just need peace. A week later, I sat on my dock again, this time with my son. We cast our fishing lines into the still water, the sun warm on our backs. "Dad," he said after a while, "is it true? You own all of this, the whole lake?" I smiled, looking out at the wide stretch of water. "Yeah, son, it's all ours. But it's not just about owning it. It's about taking care of it, protecting it from people who don't understand its value." He nodded, his small hands gripping the fishing pole. "Like that lady you told me about, exactly." I said, "She thought money and rules could buy everything, but some things like family, memories, and peace, you just can't put a price on." As the sun dipped behind the trees, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: complete contentment. Karen was gone. The lake was safe. And the people who lived here could finally breathe without fear of being bullied. Before we packed up our fishing gear, I took one last look at the calm water, the cabin standing proudly behind us. My father would have been proud. I turned to my son and said, "Remember this day, kiddo. Remember what we fought for. One day, this will all be yours. And when that time comes, I hope you'll fight just as hard to keep it." That's the story of how one stubborn man stood up to an HOA Karen who thought she could take away his home and peace. Sometimes, the only way to deal with bullies is to remind them that real power isn't about titles or fake rules. It's about knowing who you are and what you stand for. If you've ever had to stand your ground against someone who underestimated you, I'd love to hear your story in the comments. And if you enjoyed this tale, don't forget to subscribe for more stories about justice, grit, and people who refuse to be pushed around.